consumer team is in now, in the form of Martin Lewis and Dominic, Laurie, as you would
Hurrah!
expect. Hurrah, hello. And special guest appearance from Peter White, the BBC's disability correspondent.
Hi,
hello
Sheila.
to you as well, Peter. Now, we'll look at ISAs and pet insurance costs a little later. But Peter, you're with us today for a very specific reason. We're taking a good look at what rights people with disabilities have when it comes to things like, for example, buying a new wheelchair or mobility scooters. Because there's no equivalent, is there, of What Car magazine, for instance. And we're also looking at if your local corner shop perhaps has no ramp and you need a wheelchair to get around. How do you go about challenging the owners? Particularly hard, Peter, if they're, a neighbour in a sense.
That's right. There isn't a what car, although there are, a lot of disabled people will use websites and they'll do comparison sites. So it would be wrong to say that they can't use all the usual things that other people use. But of course, there is quite a lot of legislation which disabled people can use if they can make it work for them. I mean, there was a whole raft of legislation which used to be called the Disability Discrimination Act. It's all got brought in under the Equality Act, and what that says what all that legislation is, which is about being able to move around freely, it's about transport, it's about employment, and it's about goods and services.
It's about your disability, whatever it is, being taken into account, isn't it?
It's about and also it not being taken into account to discriminate against you. In other words, if you fall out with a disabled person, it can't be, as it were, because they're disabled. It doesn't mean that you can't have an argument with a disabled person, but they can't discriminate on the grounds.
I'm sure we can manage that between now and one.
I'm sure you can. You can't discriminate purely on the grounds of disability. You have to justify what you do.
The problem under the Disability Discrimination Act, which came before the Equalities Act, was that there was no sort of legal enforcement. The onus was on the individual to make the complaint, wasn't it, rather than the other way around, the law just being there for you.
Yeah, but that's still true. I mean, that is still a problem, that this is civil law. It means that if someone discriminates, if somebody won't serve you in a shop for no good reason or won't let your guide dog into a restaurant for any good reason, you have to bring the case, or an organisation has to bring a case on your behalf.
So there's no regulator. There's no regulator that will do it for you.
There isn't a kind of Office. We haven't got one of those as yet. No. There is a commission, which was originally, there was a Disability Rights Commission. That, of course, along with the Equalities Act, that all got subsumed into one organisation. And quite a lot of disabled people feared that would water it down. And I think quite a lot of people still think that by putting everything under one umbrella, whether it's gender or whether it's sexual orientation or religion and disability, that waters it down. So that's still, I think people still feel that that's a problem.
Martin, I think you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, it's important to say that when we talk about the interaction of consumer rights, which is sort of my specialty, and disability rights, in consumer rights too, you have to take the case. I mean, I often talk about what I call the sad fart rules, the satisfactory, quality, as described, fit for purpose, last a reasonable length of time. But the truth is, you can go to a shop and argue that, but the only way to enforce it, sorry to make you choke with my sad fart, Sheila.
No, you mustn't really.
The only way to enforce it is you have to go to court. And that is the way that most of these rights do tend to work. There's interesting stuff coming out by the Law Commission at the moment saying that there has to be an easier way, because I think in all of these spheres, one of the great problems is going to court is quite a difficult thing.
And expensive, of course.
Difficult and expensive. Well, you hope you'd get in the small claims court. There isn't actually a small claims court. You just get put in the small claims track, but there's no guarantee of that, so there's always a risk. And actually in all these things, there's got to be a simpler way than making it such a litigious process.
Well, let's bring in Kaliya Franklin. Hi, Kaliya.
Hi.
You have a condition called, I hope I get this right, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Yeah, that's right.
Which, that means your joints dislocate easily, so you can't walk very far, just a few steps even around the house. So when it comes to your consumer choices, not just the normal choices anyone would have to make, but those that you have to make because of your disability, how have you found it over the years?
I think it's very difficult. Whilst Peter's absolutely right to say that disabled people can and do use the internet to make comparisons, what we tend to find is there just isn't the required information to make those comparisons. So, for example, at the moment, my community are fundraising approximately £7,000 to purchase me a specialist wheelchair. Now, that's a huge responsibility, spending that money, particularly because it's been raised for me, And what we don't really have is like a central guide that's easily accessible of, go to this particular dealer. So they vary massively in quality. And I went on a personal recommendation, and I have to say, so far, I've been extremely satisfied with the way that this particular company have conducted themselves. But, we hear too many horror stories of particularly elderly people being sold completely inappropriate mobility aids at home by unscrupulous salesmen. And the difficulty, again, is then you're looking at a minefield of consumer and disability rights law.
Do you think there ought to be a disability witch, Kaliya?
Yes, I do. I think we need something like that, and I think it needs broadening out, because people who become sick and disabled always sort of scratch their heads and say, there's no guide anywhere that tells you what you need to know.
Yeah, and it's easy to think, isn't it? Oh, the GP will have advice, or the clinic that she goes to, or hospital that she or he goes to.
They're very poorly informed, even when they're genuinely trying to help.
Martin, why do you think another Martin Lewis hasn't stepped in to do a disabled consumer website? Surely there's money to be made in that, no?
Well, there are disabled websites. I mean, my own site has a disabilities forum board where people with disabilities talk and share. I suspect if you're Bendy Girl on Twitter, you probably know about it. In that case, I was listening.
Are you Bendy Girl on Twitter, Kaliya?
I am Bendy Girl on Twitter.
I've just followed her.
And,
I'm glad I got that right, or I could have been horrendously offensive, couldn't I?
Martin's site is somewhere that it's one of the places we would recommend to go to get decent benefits and consumer
look at that, Martin.
advice. I've used it myself.
But I just want to... This is a very interesting point, because Peter mentioned a disabilities witch or disabilities saving expert, or whatever you'd want to call it. I mean, the ultimate point here is, like any consumer decision, it's always down. There are no official guides for buying most things in life. There's information and there's journalism out there. And it would seem to me... Dominic, you make a very good point. It would seem to me that if there isn't some sort of authoritative journal that's doing it in an independent way, then it's a good marketplace for someone to get into. And you know what? There's a shortage of disability jobs out there. It might be someone out there might want to make a good enterprise out of it.
I do think that's the problem, though, that there are a lot of people doing this. There are disability organisations doing it. I think Kaliya's point is that it is pretty difficult to find your way through that minefield. Can I also say,
but is that any more difficult, Peter, than anybody else buying anything? I'm not.
No, well, it is for blind people, because most of the websites are inaccessible.
We're also talking about people who may have mental health conditions or learning disabilities, and there's certainly no easy read information I've ever seen about consumer guides for buying disability products, let alone mainstream products. There isn't a central hub like Martin's site serves for general consumer information.
Although you probably will get swamped now, Sheila, with people saying we're doing this. So get ready for that.
Well, listen, if they're not, I think Bendy Girl might have a business plan up her sleeve. Am I right?
Possibly. I think one of the points to make is that as disabled people, we're still very much finding our voice within the media and our public perception at the same time as we're trying to get into employment. So
I tell you what, Bendy Girl, I'll do you a deal now. If you research the good places you want to put, I will put it out there, and we will work with you. Contact me, and we will try and publish it and get it out there for some reach of what people can do.
That's fantastic, Martin, because that's exactly what we need.
All right, but you start it and get in touch.
Will do.
I've gone all warm and fuzzy. And also, this is one really for Kaliya and for Peter. When we say what was the Disability Discrimination Act and now the Broader Equalities Act, when we say, because we're going to talk more about this in the next half hour, that it requires those who provide services, which is a whole gamut of people, whether it's shops, cinemas, supermarkets, leisure centres, it requires them to make adjustments, reasonable accommodation.
That's the word.
What does that mean? Does it just give us examples of what that means. If you go to a supermarket, what does it mean they are required to provide a shopper with you to take you around the supermarket, that kind of thing?
Well, the trouble is it's this word reasonable, and reasonable can mean different things to differ exactly. It might to you, it may not to someone else. I mean, that's the problem, that it has to be argued on each case. So it could well mean provide a personal shopper, and to be fair, increasing numbers number of companies do. Debenhams have just started doing that. A lot of the supermarkets will do that. So there are, on an individual basis, you get that. It might be about not having appropriate goods too high up, so that somebody who's using a wheelchair can't reach them, let alone see them. So it can mean all these things, but the law doesn't say. It gives guidance, but the law doesn't say, and it's the guidance that gets debated in these cases that we can't afford to bring.
And Kaliya,
I've got personal experience of having gone through a Equalities Act discrimination, lack of access situation, and even as somebody who is well educated, competent, and has a law degree, that was beyond my skills. I had to take it to be managed on my behalf. And part of the reason for that is when you are the person that's been discriminated against, you're in a very vulnerable position, and often you lack confidence because all we've got in the law is this very vague definition of reasonable. So let's say a large supermarket chain discriminates against you. Well, you might have the confidence to take action against them, but if it's your local corner shop where they just haven't put a ramp in that you've been asking for years, but they're a nice couple who help you out, the last thing you really want to do is challenge people in that situation.
yeah, because they can literally be your neighbour or friend, can't they?
And to be fair, that probably isn't the most effective way, because in those sort of cases, usually doing some sort of negotiation or some sort of deal is possible. If it's the corner shop and they haven't done it, the likelihood is they can't afford it, isn't it, Kaliya? I mean,
I'm not sure. I mean, certainly one of our local businesses, I've been asking them to put grab rails at the entrance for well over 5 years. And they just have never got round to doing it. But they're, in other ways, making themselves incredibly accessible in the service that they offer. So I would never feel in a position to legally challenge that business. It would feel utterly unreasonable to do so. But probably unless I buy the grab rails and get someone to install them, they'll never get round to it.
Well, Kaliya, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Anytime. Kaliya Franklin, Martin Lewis's business partner. We'll talk more to Martin and to Dominic and to Peter White, the BBC's disability correspondent, after the news and sport. But before even that, here's Simon with the weather.
Thanks, Shelagh.